Are you a businesswoman who is finding it challenging to get your ideas across and make a point? Welcome to Speakers Who Get Results with Elizabeth Bachman, a podcast dedicated to helping women get the visibility they want, whether making a speech or talking in a meeting. Every week, get valuable lessons from Elizabeth or learn from her roundtable conversations with experts and speakers on how to make a difference, not just a point. On to the show with your host, Elizabeth Bachman.
Hello, and welcome to Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host, and this is the podcast where we talk about leadership and working with teams, working with yourself, knowing yourself, communication skills, presentation skills, and so much more. Before I get into today's interview, I'd like to invite you to see where your presentation skills are strong by checking out our free 4-minute assessment at speakforresultsquiz.com. That's www.speakforresultsquiz.com. And that's where you can see where you are a great presenter, whether it's giving a speech or just addressing a meeting in your organization, and where perhaps a little bit of support could get you the results you need and the recognition that you deserve. My guest today is Megan Robinson. And Megan Robinson is the CEO of eLeader Experience. And she's been on a 15-year journey to make leadership approachable for everyone, regardless of title, position, or expertise. This journey has led her to become the principal at eLeader Experience, in which she develops individuals and teams to transform their leadership skills. Megan's programs address the fundamental leadership challenges that limiting company successes and stalling your core metrics. Megan started her career in marketing and moved her way through the corporate ladder at advertising agencies and Fortune 500 companies. Along the path, she clocked in many hours of refining her own leadership skills before starting her own marketing company, where she had to learn that what real leadership is the hard way. It was at that first company that Megan discovered that her true passion was the transformational process of coaching. And so she became a John Maxwell certified coach and a DISC trainer. In addition, she's the past president of ATD Chai, that's Association for Talent Development in Chicago, the leading learning and development organization in Chicagoland. Having empowered and transformed so many leaders across the country, soon to be across the globe, Megan is excited to bring her impactful and relatable leadership principles to your organization, so that your people are walking away with an empowered awareness of responsibility, accountability, and while contributing positively to your company culture. We had a very interesting conversation about the difference between management and leadership. I know you'll have a good time. Here's the interview. Megan Robinson, welcome to Speakers Who Get Results.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for having me. Looking forward to this conversation.
Well, I'm delighted to have you. You had some really interesting things to say about leadership and management and that the endless puzzle there is to solve around leadership and management. But first, let me ask you, who would be your dream interview? So if you were to interview someone who's no longer with us, who would it be? What would you ask them? And who should be listening?
So for me, it's actually Winston Churchill.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, historical figure, very classic, not around anymore. But I read his biography a couple of years ago, and it's fascinating because you hear so much about Churchill. You think so much about the impact that he's had, the type of leader that he was, and really the challenging times that he went through.
Yeah.
But no small challenges, no small feats at that time, no lack of leadership.
World War II, countries being invaded, and there are people in the government who want to appease Hitler.
Yeah. There's a lot of a war on every front, just about for
Mm-hmm.
him. And I was reading this biography and just amazed at the style of leadership, the types of habits that he had. And I couldn't help but think to myself of how would that really be accepted or appreciated in this day and age?
Ah, okay. Give me some examples.
He was pretty assertive, would be the polite way. He was rude to a lot of people.
Uh-huh.
Very demanding. He was very curt. He kept very interesting hours. And it was situational, I think at some point,
Mm-hmm.
but in general, the character of the person and the type of leadership that was celebrated at that day and age and at that time is very different than now. And I'll even put kind of the Steve Jobs in that category. If you look at early Steve Jobs leadership behaviors and how he treated his team, I can't help but think that people maybe wouldn't have stuck around like they did
Uh-huh.
back.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd love to have that conversation of how his leadership would have evolved between the
Mm-hmm.
times or some of those mistakes or the styles that he'd do differently, and really have that deep conversation of how would it be applicable and what lessons he had from that style and from that time that works today. Because we are going through a lot of challenge. There is a lot of change. I mean, there's no
Mm-hmm.
Hitler and World War II going on, but we're pretty
We could.
close.
There's a war going on. Yeah, there's a major war going on that affects the world, and the world is so connected now.
Is.
It's really important. Actually, that's very interesting. It makes me think about the whole history and model of men being commanders and leaders. You've got to be bossy. You've got to be in charge. Now there's a whole move towards empathy, which makes me think it's moving towards empathy for men, teaching men how to be empathetic like women, and maybe teaching women how to not be so empathetic that you lose your boundaries. That's We just recently had a podcast about that, about the difference between empathy and boundaries, and having uh, having gotten myself into trouble for being too empathetic and not clear enough. I wish I had known earlier. That was one of the things I had to learn when I first became a boss.
Everyone along their journey finds some times where they need to either show more empathy or not necessarily show less empathy, but put the empathy in balance with
Mhm.
other priorities and goals,
The
as well as
balance is the whole thing. Yeah, yeah. So you were talking about the difference between being a manager and a leader, which I thought, okay, I want to ask her about that. What, how do you differentiate? What's important about the difference between a manager and a leader?
managers and leaders have titles that go interchangeable. I think a lot of
Hmm.
people really stop and think, what is the difference between a manager and a leader? They kind of put it all in the same bucket, in this kind of
Hmm.
general leadership, management, power, authority, doing things. And that's that kind of bucket for everyone. So breaking it down is really, really helpful because you understand what becomes more management tasks, what's more leadership skills, and where you need to develop. Because I'm
Hmm.
a big fan of you need to have both. We just talked about balance between empathy and boundaries. Everything in life is a
Hmm.
balance. It's that pendulum where you just can't swing it one side or another.
Hmm.
A lot of times in my trainings and in my coaching, I'll focus on the delineation between management and leadership, specifically around people and around process. So, when you're talking about management, you're really focusing on how to manage a process.
Hmm.
What are the tools? What are the resources? What are the steps? What is the administration level? What is the process for getting things done? What are the tools, the KPIs, the key performance indicators that you have around that process? And that is management.
Hmm.
And so often that structure that management needs to be successful, people love to rebel, right? Some
Hmm.
people really or having a lot of structure around them, or
Hmm.
people get super focused in it, and then you get that micromanager that is very
Hmm.
nitpicky, all of those specific details. So those kind of the challenges around management. Leadership, on the other end of things, focuses on people.
Mhm.
How are the people? Are they aligned to it? What's their motivation? Are they engaged? How are you connecting with people? And so a lot of times you'll see people issues or people challenges that are people aren't feeling engaged or people aren't motivated or people aren't excited about a decision or direction or change. And then they try to solve it with management and process.
With a process. Okay, right.
So that's
You
where I
will fill out this form and you will then enjoy coming to work.
pretty much, right? Now
Okay.
we have a process for leadership. No, that's not how it works. So
So
I
so
really focus
give us an example, please.
on management versus leadership.
Yeah, well, like, if it's putting in a process that whether it worked or not.
I'll say one of my favorite processes was around an organization. They had many different departments, right? Every organization has a lot of departments, and per usual, communication is a challenge, right? How do you get
Mhm.
people to communicate with each other? How do you know what one hand's doing versus the other hand? How are they working together? And that's part of a culture thing, right? Some
Mhm.
organizations really build up the relationships. The departments, the leaders of those different departments work on fostering those relationships, of connecting with those other leaders and people. And some organizations don't. They get siloed, they get defensive, they have conflicting challenges, right? They're not aligned on the same goals and priorities. And that to me is always a leadership issue, right?
Ah,
How is the team connected? How are you aligning on bigger goals and vision? But this organization, they identified that they were having some communication challenges between departments. People weren't really connecting the way that they needed to in order to get the work done. So like, okay, well, let's have a weekly meeting where all the departments can come together and they can fill out this sheet and tell everyone what's going on.
okay.
Think that worked out well?
Yeah, no, doesn't sound like it sounds like
Yeah,
actually
no.
the way it sounds like a very old-fashioned way of managing processes and
Mhm.
people.
Well, they identified the need, right? The gap is that people aren't talking to each other. The different departments are doing different things. They're not collaborative. So let's have a meeting and let's force everyone to sit down and talk about what's going on.
Mhm.
It makes sense. It's logical. It's a great process for it. But they didn't have the underpinning of leadership. They didn't have the connection, the engagement from the different departments, the alignment in order for that process to really work.
Mhm. What would you have done instead? Or did you help them out instead?
I talked a lot. I actually was working with a lot of the functional leaders of
Mhm.
that organization. So a lot of the department heads, and I challenged all of them. I said, "Great, if you do this weekly meeting, if you fill out another form for your processes, is that going to help you?"
Mhm.
They all kind of had that blank, that pause. Like, no, you guys don't need another form, another meeting to attend. That is going to be a waste of your time. That will then continue to drag this company down and weigh it down and get heavier. What do you guys need to do instead? And really opening up that conversation to what does their communication look like if it is collaborative?
Mhm.
What do those individual leaders need to be doing? How do they need to be reaching out? What do they need to be sharing? And asking them what that is and really looking at those different functional leaders and asking them what their needs were. What does that success look like for them? And shifting it, not just because I have that magic wand, right? Oh, well, you need I can't give them a new process for it.
Right.
They have to create it themselves. And having that space and that opportunity to really focus on not just what the problem is and here's a quick fix solution, but how are you going to adopt that problem into the vision for what you want your organization to come, what you want
Mhm.
your organization to be, and giving them that ability to start flexing those leadership muscles, to start thinking about things differently. That's where the growth happened. That's where they were able to connect and engage at a different level and show up more with leadership instead of just that management toolbox.
Mhm. Okay. So, um, that actually sounds fascinating. And one of the questions I had for you is, can you be both a manager and a leader? And I think you've just answered that. Lead and manage. What do you do if you are not in a position of authority? If you have to influence without being in authority?
I love that. I work with a lot of emerging leaders, mid-level managers, all the way through directors, VPs, and some executives. But so often people don't feel like a leader until they have a specific title. And the challenge with that is then you don't show up as a leader without that title, right? Now you're off the hook. Oh, well, I don't have C in front of my title, so I don't need to show up as a leader. And that, I think, is the biggest misconception and the biggest disempowerment that individuals put on themselves, right? You're like, well, I don't have that. I don't need to show up that way. And I will challenge everyone that the first person that you need to lead is yourself.
Okay.
Being able to have that intention for where you're going, what you want to do, how you're showing up, how you're contributing to that organization, that team, that goal, that is the first piece. And without that, whatever else you do isn't going to get you very far. But if you don't have that authority, you don't have that power in that traditional sense, you still show up with leadership. And I'll say leadership is influence. It's a John Maxwell quote, right? Nothing more, nothing less, and it's influence. And I will say, I know many of people without power, without authority, that are sitting in the room and they say something and everyone turns their head to watch and listen.
Okay.
That is the leadership. And that has nothing to do with rank or order. It has to do with contributing positively. It has something to do with being on task, with keeping that group aligned, with asking the right question, with staying curious, with being engaged. Those are the ways that you show up with leadership without that specific power.
Okay, this is a huge part of the work that I do, is helping women learn how to be visible and then show their value by speaking up at the right time. And how can someone who feels like it isn't safe to speak up, if it doesn't feel safe in your organization, what can you do?
I would find things that are safe, right?
Okay.
It's never everything is unsafe. There are certain topics, certain danger zones, right? You know when something's unsafe and you know when it's safe. Either going to that safety and hanging out there if you need to, but also I think there's a delicate way of challenging that. And I'm going to say collaboration tends to be my biggest tool in the toolbox.
Allies is the word I use. I think we're saying the same thing, though. Yes.
Potentially, but I would say you can find an ally or you can collaborate with just about anyone, even the unsafe people, if you're able to find some common ground that you can work from. If you have a same goal, if you have something that you can align to, if you have a similar vision, if you have an outcome, if you have a similar value or perspective, you're able to find some piece to build an ally. Sounds like you have a lot of tips and tools on building out those allies. But that is always a safe place that you can go to. And so establishing some of those, I'll say, boundaries or safe places, you're able to challenge some of the things that maybe aren't as safe. If you go blazing, I can't imagine you're going to really get the results that you're looking for. And you're not being collaborative at that point. You're just finding enemies and you're not creating any influence.
Yes, and often because most of the leaders of this podcast, most of the listeners are women. And, they're just, men and women speak different languages. We should just acknowledge that and then deal with it. It's forgetting that is what gets us in trouble. B, there are things that men can say that women cannot say, and vice versa. So there are things that women can say that men can't say. Women don't necessarily notice that, but they only complain about not being able to say the same things. But really, it has to do with societal expectations. I really think we're not trained to speak men's language or women's language, that society sort of socializes us to do it. I don't think anybody does it on purpose. As we talk about that, though, if you want to step out and you found a safe place to do it, where can you begin to be a leader within your team or in leading your team? Give us a story.
I find lots of opportunities for individuals without titles to become leaders, men or women. And I'll say a lot of times I work less with gender and more with limiting expectations or
Hmm.
beliefs, or I'll say introvert versus extrovert,
Ah,
or
yes.
might say feminine energy versus masculine energy.
Hmm.
It's probably a pretty common one. So I do know a lot of men that are uncomfortable voicing their opinion
Hmm.
or uncomfortable letting people know where those boundaries are. There's definitely a confidence and authority, a way to position that. But when you are showing up as a leader without that authority, I'm going to say asking a great question tends to
Okay.
be easy to jump
Hmm.
into that because a question doesn't assume, and I'm saying that an open ended, truly curious question where, and I'll even say a non stupid question.
Hmm.
And a non-stupid question is one that, you can find the answer to on your own, or you're generally trying to like really focus someone in a specific direction. No one wants to be hurted with the question. But if you have a curiosity or if you're concerned about something and voicing it in that little bit of soft language with
Hmm.
a little bit of power of I'm curious about, or this is really concerning because voicing that whole piece and letting them know what that background is gives you so much authority in that space and time. It doesn't mean that you're exerting power over someone. It's that you're coming with them
Hmm.
with that question, with that build, and you're building something together. It doesn't mean that you have to take something away. It means that you want to add to it.
How can we manage up? Say if you're leading and you really think it's your manager, your direct manager that is hurting the team or getting in the way of the team functioning well. How can one manage up?
Getting in the way of the team functioning well. Sometimes it's curiosity. I will say it's a lot of leadership yourself. And
Mhm,
it's the question that you ask. Ask what their intention is with something,
mhm,
particularly if it's hurtful or if it feels malicious or is confusing. Getting clarity around something tends to dispel some of that negativity and that negative energy. And you're actually showing up as a leader by helping your own boss or manager
mhm,
that. You're showing up as a leader for the rest of the team because they're seeing
mhm.
exactly what you're doing and you're helping everyone in that organization. I'll definitely say being really intentional with the outcomes that you want, particularly when you're leading up. Go ahead.
No, 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 keep going, keep going.
I love the intentionality with outcomes just because it's so focused on exactly what you want out of that conversation, exactly what you need from that leader. Understanding and being able to voice your perspective, again, in a non threatening way, but this is what I'm looking for, gives you that transparency to align with that other leader. It gives you the transparency to align with anyone, whether it's someone below you or beneath or above you. It really helps create that collaborative space where when you are trying to lead someone above you, you can't necessarily step over them, but you can walk with them in a really powerful way that helps make you look even better.
And this, of course, would be a private conversation, not embarrassing them in front of the full group.
I'm going to say your approach matters a lot, and you're definitely the expert in the tonality or the approach or how you maybe want to kind of give some of those clarifying and soft phrases to it. But absolutely, you can do it one on one. You can do it in a group setting as long as you're not trying to put them on the spot. And if your intention is to make them look stupid, that's going to be pretty transparent pretty quickly.
Everybody will figure that out. Yes,
Exactly.
yes.
But if your intention is to work better or to achieve a certain goal, and you're really focused on that element of it, the questions that you ask, the tonality, the way that you go about it is going to be more helpful than hurtful. And you can always give people the out, like, hey, maybe I need to take this offline. We can always step away, or you want to circle back with someone if you're not comfortable facing
Mhm,
that group because you don't want to challenge or out someone. Again, you're coming at it from a place of how can we work better? How can I get clarity as
mhm.
opposed
As we are talking about leadership, Does this change when you are a high level leader? If you're a senior director or vice president or at C level, does this change?
What management and leadership is?
Yeah, well, just how you approach the question of leading, of empathy, if we will, words like that.
I'm a big fan of it doesn't change. The
It does
same
not change.
the same skills and tools that you develop along the way. And it's also not a flip that you switch that you flip, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not, okay, well, I was an individual contributor or I was a director and now I'm a VP. So let me flip my switch and I'm going to show up with empathy today.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't happen that way. You've been building that empathy muscle, and it is most likely the way that you've shown the empathy, the curiosity, the collaboration, the people
Mm-hmm.
aspect, even the vision and how you've really been looking for the future or how you've adapted to change. All of those leadership mindset and capabilities are the things that get you to that next level. And so
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be leaning into them more so than the management tasks when you are at that level, right? You're not in the
Yeah.
minute
You
level.
want to be when you're at a senior level, you want to be a strategic thinker and be shown as a strategic thinker. Have people realize that you're a strategic thinker rather than focusing on the details.
Definitely the details. And I think the strategic thinking is so difficult for people to really pin down, like, what is strategic or critical thinking? And it's
Mm-hmm.
just aligning it, making sure that you have that common goal and have that common vision, that you know what change, what you're trying to implement, and having that transparency in communication. That's what shifts it. And so even if you are, before the promotion or during the promotion, you have to balance more of those management and leadership activities together. As you move higher up, you're focusing much more in the leadership activities, but I'm pretty sure everyone knows that that very high level leader that doesn't do any managing and the
Yes,
impact of the team as
and
well.
the impact that has. Megan, I want to ask you a little bit about personality types. There was a big article in the New York Times at the time that we are recording this in March of 2023, a big article in the New York Times about how important personality types are and personality quizzes, if you will, personality tests for a team and an organization. And I know that's something that you teach. How do you approach that? Why it matters for those who haven't ever done it? Anyone who's done it, you get it. Or if you've done it, you had a bad trainer who couldn't really help. Why does it matter, and what does it teach you?
A lot of those, I'll say, behavioral assessments or personality assessments, there's quite a few and they have varying degrees of reliability.
Mm-hmm.
But I look at that really as understanding yourself and your natural tendencies. What is it that you gravitate towards? Where is your zone of comfort? What is it that people may perceive or understand? But I'm a huge, I mean, all of my work is around behavioral change, right?
Mm-hmm.
We all make choices. We all choose whether we want to behave as an introvert, extrovert. We choose if we want to behave in different ways with empathy, without empathy. And those can be learned.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where understanding your personality or style or your zone of comfort, I would say, is helpful to have a starting place to
Mm-hmm.
understand strengths and weaknesses, but also understanding where you may want to shift or how you use those to the best of your ability. I had a client who was really big into DISC, and I do a lot of DISC training.
DISC is a personality assessment, personality type assessment. Yeah, DISC.
Thank you. And they were focused on this C type or this consistent or compliance style, one of the 4 styles. Like that is the best type to have a project manager.
Uh-huh.
And they only hire project managers or people for their team in this one DISC style. And I'm looking at them and say, that is absolutely not true. Just because someone has this natural style doesn't mean that they can't build other skills. Doesn't mean that the other skills of the other 4 styles isn't important to the success of a project manager.
Mm-hmm.
And so I looked at much as a way to appreciate and actually show empathy towards different styles and be able to flex your leadership toolkit, because great leaders don't just stay in their zone of comfort. They, again, are looking to connect with people. So if you're
Mm-hmm.
looking to have a stronger connection with a team member or a different department or even your boss, and you need to lead them, sometimes you have to speak, I'll say, their behavioral style language in what
Mm-hmm.
resonates, so that you are getting that alignment, so that you are continuing in a path that makes sense for both of you. But that flexibility is what's most important in styles.
And also just the importance of surrounding yourself with people who have different styles and who could perhaps support you in the places where you're not so great. You know, I can do a lot of things, but there are a lot of, but I do some of them much better than others. So, how to support yourself? How can you teach a team to accept the value of the other types? For instance, you mentioned introverts and extroverts
Mhm.
recently. You know, if you've got some introverts on a team and you've got some extroverts on a team, how would you approach each style to remind them of the value of the other?
It's funny, I was doing a training, and it's very easy to tell who the extroverts are, right?
Yes.
Quick, they're raising their hands, they're ready to answer things, and giving the introverts the space and the time to process and the opportunity to speak. Every single time that happens, those extroverts are so appreciative and immediately understand the value of the other opinion.
Really?
I'll say very, very quickly, if given the right situation for it.
I
My
was
my
going to say,
husband,
I hear lots of extroverts who are too impatient to wait for what the introverts have to say.
great facilitation
Uh,
will give them that space, right? It's not when they're on their own. So I had actually another coach that I was talking with, and he was talking about his client who is an extrovert, and everyone, he's CEO of a company, everyone on his team is an introvert. And
mhm,
he's frustrated because nobody, will give him ideas. No one gives him feedback.
mhm,
No one participates because he's an extrovert and he's quick to the quick to
yeah,
the draw. And I said, okay, well, how is he asking them? How is he
mhm,
being the best leader possible and soliciting the right feedback, knowing what you know about the team? And it
mhm,
changes, right? It's not just that me behavior, here's what my assumptions are, here's what my expectation is. It's how do I get the best out of the team? What do I know about them? Is he asking for feedback immediately? Is he
mhm,
giving them the time to think and process? Is he circling back with people so that they have that space?
mhm,
And so that's where I think in leadership, yes, it takes some awareness. It definitely, I think one of the tenets of great leadership is that understanding that everyone is doing the very best that they can. And you have
oh,
a
yeah,
certain
one
appreciation
hopes. Yeah,
with the resources that they have, with the perception, and having a bit of that belief and faith in the team around you.
mhm,
Yes, when you are managing closely and you're seeing the gaps, you're able to address it, but there's always a reason for it.
mhm,
And people to be patient enough to listen, to pay attention to what is really going on, and making the decisions on what's the right fit, either for the process, the culture, the team, and what's not. It should never be a surprise either way on that one. So
right.
I'll say the appreciation, the understanding, the awareness
Mhm.
tends to always be that first step.
This is why, having a diverse team, diverse personality styles, diverse backgrounds, and gender, nationality, all the diversity, all the things that we now try to embrace as diversity. The whole point of it is to get different points of view into the room so that you can make better decisions.
And I'll say, going back to that leadership or management, right? If you're a manager, you're checking the boxes. Did everyone talk in this meeting? Did I hear everyone's opinion? When
Uh-huh.
you're leading, you're soliciting it in a way that makes them want to share their opinion, that you're
Mhm.
curious about the answers for it. And when you're leading without that position or authority, it's really easy to ask the question, so what does Jose think about this? Or so-and-so has been quiet. You can quickly pass that microphone to someone that hasn't been speaking. It doesn't have to be your meeting. It doesn't
Mhm.
have to be the spot where you are leading actively, but you can still show up as a leader by being curious or wanting to hear those diverse points of view. People respect that. People, especially the introverts, know without putting them on the spot in an uncomfortable way.
Mhm.
Right?
Megan Robinson, this has been really great and very interesting. If somebody has been listening to us and says, I need to learn all of this, where would you start? What's the first thing you could do?
I would love to have a conversation with them to understand where they are on that leadership journey. Because when you say, where do I start? There are so many places, and we all have our own experience and baggage going along with it. So please check out my website, eleaderexperience.com. You can book some time with me there or connect with me. And I would love to learn more about what that leadership journey looks like for you and where it is that you're really looking to take those next steps.
I think that's a very good point that there's so many factors in all of this that it really helps to just talk to somebody outside yourself. I would always say, get the question out of your head and out into the air. Talk to somebody who can help you talk your way through it. I don't know about you, Megan, but I'm the kind of person who, when I'm talking something through, I I I will often have the answer come out of my mouth before my brain has consciously formed it. And I know people who really understand things better if they can sit down and write about it. So if you have people that you can go back and forth with, that's the value of having a coach, actually, having outside eyes who can help you be a bit more objective and then make useful suggestions.
What that does, and I think a lot of people in their leadership journey, the first thing they do is they start reading, right?
Mhm.
There are a million and one gurus out there. There's a bunch of, like, they just start collecting and information gathering, which is a nice first step. But what you miss and what you're talking about when you start talking with someone, when you start writing it down and journaling or reflecting, is that you don't internalize it and make it your own. And
Mhm.
that's where you start to really connect your neural pathways. That's where you really start to address those key issues and start to discover what it is that works for you, what resonates for you.
Mhm.
Because we are all on a different journey, because we all show up a little bit differently as leaders, and there is, like, the different styles, a lot of power in that. There is not a one size fits all. So until you start to really understand and formulate what that looks like, it's hard to know if it's working or not.
Great, great. Well, Megan Robinson, thank you so much for having been on Speakers Who Get Results. I will put all her contact information in the show notes, dear listeners. And this has been Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host. If you enjoyed this conversation, please tell your friends, subscribe to the podcast, subscribe to us on YouTube if you prefer that. And most of all, please go to Apple Podcasts and leave us a good review. Apple Podcasts is the one that counts, and a good review from you will help more people get to interesting conversations like this one with Megan Robinson. This has been Speakers Who Get Results. I'll see you on the next one.
We have just concluded another great episode of Speakers Who Get Results with your host, Elizabeth Bachman. If you got value from today's episode, please feel free to share us with your friends and colleagues. You may also visit elizabethbachman.com for additional resources. Be sure to tune in every week for new episodes, and thanks for tuning in.